The Prince of India was rushed to a local hospital where he was treated for a concussion and hypothermia. But upon discovering his identity, Murari was immediately flown to a military-based hospital. His family from India was promptly notified of his release, and the governmental agencies searching for his whereabouts were told of his freed status. Murari was kept in a governmental facility for days, undergoing medical testing and psychiatric evaluations. The Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Counterintelligence Agency were collecting testimonies and debriefing the young prince. Murari Varadaraj was eventually released into the custody of his parents and flown to his homeland for further medical care. His fiancée, Arathi Rana, was by his side at every turn. For a week, the Asian prince was surrounded by his relatives. Malani Varadaraj and his other siblings crowded around the very changed man. Murari looked much the same on the outside, but his soul and mind were forever altered by his ordeal. He viewed his position as a young prince differently. When he was able, he immediately visited the slums of his province, much to the shock of his parents. He and Malani toured some of the poorest areas, bringing with them food and clothing for the families in need. Murari also arranged a series of meetings with the palatial hospital executives and administrators. He wanted to know what was being done at Varadaraj University Hospital to better the medical conditions of the surrounding poor communities that lacked money and health care. The junior prince hated his captors and was assisting his government in every way to find the men who had abducted him, the men who had nearly robbed him of his sanity and life. They were still at large. The leads the police and the military received were many, but led to no arrests. Murari thought of the hostage taker Shakhtar on many occasions. The microvascular surgeon had no explanation as to why he was still alive. Shakhtar had kept his word. He had freed the prince. It had been a brutal, traumatic release, but it had occurred nevertheless. Murari loathed his method of doing things, but continually remembered the man's words when he rode through the streets of his beloved city. He wondered if any of the money taken from the Varadaraj family was being used as the terrorists had suggested. The young prince wondered whether those funds would stimulate change in his country. Would they help the women and children the man had described? He hoped the man did indeed use his newly acquired wealth in such a way. Murari was settling into his old lifestyle. He tried not to think of the approaching new year and its problems. The young ruler knew his parents were furious with him, although they did not voice it. They held their anger out of concern for his fragile state, but they were not pleased with his sudden decision. He was no longer a man engaged to Arathi Rana. Murari Varadaraj had broken the arrangement and had thus terminated his family's commitment. He could no longer continue with the lie, especially after a traumatic experience. He was finally learning the value of complete honesty, and he chose to embrace it. The young Indian had tried to be sensitive about the matter. He had both publicly and privately apologized to Arathi and her family. He had even held a brief press conference stating his regret and thanking the world for their prayers and blessings. Yet with all of his family obligations still pressing on him, Prince Murari Varadaraj found himself seated on a private jet plane headed for the States. He had unfinished business waiting for him at Penn's Landing Memorial Hospital. He had one more thing to take care of. His sister, Malani, was at his side. She too had a personal reason for traveling so far on the eve before the new year. She had a prior commitment with a very handsome African-American police officer who had promised to take her dancing before the clock struck midnight.